rush out at 1:45. It doesn't mean that what I'll be hearing is not interesting. It's a flight schedule thing. It's interesting, and I promise this was not choreographed, what the remark that Gérard made about competition e concorrenza, because I was about to make the same remark to start this panel about regulation, actually about policymaking, legislation, and regulation. We tend in English to use always the terms of regulation. It doesn't mean the same. In France, it might be more clear. I'm not going to start speaking French to this audience, of course. But I think we need to be precise in which words we use, because policy is not the same as legislation, it's not the same as regulation. As it happens in the past, standards are very often used in support of policy making or in support of legislation, sometimes in support of regulation. We are hosted in this great country, which was part of the sort of big push. And it's strange because not only I'm in Finland, which is the country of Nokia, but also there was this eclipse of moon the day before yesterday. And I think the GSM moment was this sort of very specific alignment of planets where everybody pushed in the same direction. Industry, regulators, spectrum authorities, governments, and so forth and so on, to make this incredible success story and all this value creation that followed the second generation mobile communication, turned into 3G, 4G, and hopefully now 5G. So historically, there has been in a number of domains this standard at the service of a policy vision or legislation or in support of regulation. The way we see it happening in Etsy is that as the world moves to being digitalized, which I think is the theme of this global forum, this will be increasingly true because as all the services of our lives, be it health, tax, transport, etc., and becomes digitally enabled, it is true that the question of standards and interoperability will be increasingly maybe crucial to make sure that we get the right level of interoperability, level of protection, access for all the consumers, etc. The way we see it in Etsy is that this sort of there is sort of a triangle, if I may say, which is the policy and legal. Then there is the standard and technology and business. And with the digitization, there is increasingly the third pillar, which is the users. Standardization the way at the beginning, and maybe I speak under the control of some people who were in Etsy before I was back then, but was very much the way Etsy did it, a business-to-business exercise. And increasingly it's getting to be business-to-business plus business-to-consumers because of the digitization of every aspects of life, every nook and crannies of life and economic interaction. Now, with regard to your second question, we are sometimes struck, and I'm very sorry there is no one from the European Commission in the room, unless I'm very sorry. No, but yeah, maybe this was the voice above. No, the way we see it, and all the regions are this sort of digitization of the world is obviously something global. So all the regions are dealing with it differently. What we see happening is that this thing of standards in support of either a policy vision or a legislative framework or some regulation, which again in France would be rather ex post than ex ante. It goes usually with a vision on not only the things about interoperability, user access, user protection, etc., but also in support of competitiveness. And it's true that the way it is tailored in Europe, those of you who hear sometimes EU fortress, you can scream and shout because this is simply not true. We do work, we have 800 members in Etsy. It goes alphabetically from Apple to ZTE, with everybody in the middle that you can think of. So it's about, we work with the US, we work with Asia, we work with Chinese players and so forth and so on. And which means because of the role standards play, we have a lot of interaction, not only with industries, but also with governments, policymakers and so forth and so on. Nowhere else but in Europe we see a system which is as open to the rest of the world in terms of standards in support of regulation, but also legislation and in support of policy. What happens with, and Klaus has mentioned the digital single market, or what's happened with the reform of regulation, of standardization 3 years ago now in Europe, It means as sort of open up Europe to all sorts of players from all regions of the world, including to get standards in support of regulation, but also in support of policy. The question we sometimes want to ask to our friends from the European Commission, hence the fact that I'm sorry there are none in the room, is what is the vision behind? And how does this support the competitiveness of Europe? And I think everybody can understand that there is this tension between user interoperability, et cetera, and also regional competitiveness. Sarah will probably confirm that both